Good afternoon. This is Jay Frost, and welcome to Frontlines of Social Good, our weekly news and views program from the Philanthropy Mastermind series. As usual, we will begin with the top 5 gifts of the week, a roundup of the largest and most consequential philanthropic commitments around the globe. And then, in the headlines, checkout campaigns hit new highs. A major philanthropist doubles down. One of the world's top universities takes legal action, and Congress prepares for a highly charged hearing on nonprofit funding. Later in the program, we're joined by Asha Parlberg, Project Director of the Global Philanthropy Indices, to explore the newly released 2025 Global Philanthropy Environment Index. We'll examine the conditions that are shaping the ability to give and receive around the world, and what this year's findings reveal about the state of civil society from north to south and east to west. Then in the second half of the show, communications strategist Jeff Rum, author of 6 Steps for Impact Report Success, shares practical insights on how to move beyond metrics and tell a compelling story of your organization's impact. Let's get started. First, the top 5 gifts of the week, and as usual, we'll go in reverse order. So number 5, the Veal Foundation has pledged $10 million to establish the University Hospital's Veal Healthcare Transformation Institute. The Institute will focus on care redesign, digital health, and advanced analytics to improve patient outcomes and transform healthcare delivery. Number 4, a gift of $15 million from Tom and Kathleen Bogan to Stonehill College in Easton, Massachusetts, will support the construction of the Tom and Kathleen Bogan Arena, a new 120,000 square foot facility for basketball and ice hockey. The gift is the largest in the college's history and will help fund the state-of-the-art athletic and training facilities, which are aimed at enhancing student life and community engagement. We have a tie for number 3 this week. First, Carol and Alan Wyatt have committed a $50 million bequest to Brigham and Women's Hospital, marking the largest in the hospital's history. The gift will support women's health research and equity in medical innovation. And Peter Kellner has given $50 million to Colgate University to support the university's 3rd Century campaign, including the development of a cohesive lower campus with new residential, social, and academic spaces for juniors and seniors. This is the largest gift, a single gift, in Colgate's history. Number 2, the Novo Nordisk Foundation has pledged up to $57.76 million to the WHO over the 2025 to 2028 period. This funding will support initiatives focusing on non-communicable diseases, antimicrobial resistance, and strengthening health systems. And number 1, $90 million from the Line Weber Foundation to 5 U.S. institutions: the University of Michigan, University of California, Berkeley, University of Chicago, MIT, and the Institute for Advanced Study, to establish the Line Weber Institutes for Theoretical Physics. This marks the largest philanthropic commitment ever to theoretical physics research. Have we missed a big gift announcement this week? We almost certainly have. Please let us know about the gifts that you're hearing about in your world by contacting me directly through our sponsor, DonorSearch, or via LinkedIn. You can reach me at j@donorsearch.net or through the links in the chat. Now, here's some of the most important stories shaping up in the nonprofit and philanthropic sector this week. Have you ever made a contribution to a checkout counter at your grocery store or by rounding up a purchase at a restaurant? Well, checkout charity campaigns like those raised $275 million in the US alone in 2024, according to the nonprofit Times and Engage for Good's America's Charity Checkout Champions report. Leading the pack was Children's Miracle Network Hospitals, bringing in $50.4 million through partnerships with Walmart, Costco, and others. PetSmart Charities followed with $40.1 million, while St. Jude Children's Research Hospital and the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society each raised over $20 million through retail partners like Chili's, Walgreens, and CVS. The top 79 campaigns averaged $3.5 million each, with donations typically collected by rounding up purchases or adding $1 at the register. Since 2002, checkout giving has generated and this surprised even me, more than $5.8 billion. For more on that story, do consult the nonprofit Times. Bill Gates says he's on track to give away nearly $200 billion through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, with a major focus on Africa. In an interview with CBS News, Gates outlined plans to expand work in vaccine distribution, polio eradication, and food security, calling global inequality a huge moral challenge. He also reaffirmed his children won't inherit the bulk of his wealth, emphasizing the foundation's mission over personal legacy. Since its founding, the Gates Foundation has distributed more than $76 billion worldwide. Now, revisiting an ongoing saga in the tug-of-war between the White House and higher education, Harvard University is pushing back against efforts in Congress to cut off its access to federal research funding, warning that such actions could harm national security, public health, and the broader research ecosystem. According to Reuters, Harvard has filed a lawsuit seeking to unfreeze $2.5 billion in federal research funding that was blocked by the Trump administration. The university argues that the funding freeze, which affects nearly 1,000 research projects, including on cancer, infectious disease, and national security, violates its free speech rights. The administration's actions followed Harvard's rejection of a list of demands from the White House. President Trump has accused elite universities like Harvard of being centers of leftist ideology and anti-Semitism, prompting a wider array of investigations into the institution, including treatment of Jewish students, gender and sex discrimination, and ties to foreign entities. In a separate legal battle, a federal judge extended a temporary restraining order blocking the Trump administration from terminating Harvard's right to host international students and scholars. This move came after the Department of Homeland Security's attempted to revoke Harvard's student exchange visitor program certification. Harvard argued there that the government's actions violated the First Amendment, the Due Process Clause, and the Administrative Procedure Act. University leaders say both the legal and legislative efforts represent a troubling trend, politically motivated threats to academic freedom and institutional independence. Harvard President Alan Garber stated that while the university remains open to constructive dialogue, it will stand firm against actions that would undermine its mission or its people. Oral arguments on the funding issue are scheduled for July 21st. We'll be reporting on that as it proceeds. On Wednesday, June 4th, that's tomorrow, the House Subcommittee on Delivering on Government Efficiency, better known in the public media as DOGE, chaired by Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, will hold a hearing titled Public Funds, Private Agendas, NGOs Gone Wild. The session aims to examine whether federally funded nonprofit organizations are improperly using taxpayer dollars to advance political or ideological goals. Among those called to testify is Diane Yentl, President and CEO of the National Council of Nonprofits, who received a formal invitation from the subcommittee earlier this week. In response, Yentl stated that the hearing's title and framing ignore the true work that charitable nonprofits across the country are doing to support their communities, respond to urgent needs, and provide critical services. Environmental organizations are expected to be a particular focus, according to reporting from E&E News, as the committee investigates whether climate advocacy groups may be exceeding the bounds of their federal grant mandates. The National Council of Nonprofits has published a new resource, quote, Setting the Record Straight, Nonprofits Are Trusted and Accountable Local Partners, end quote, to rebut claims of misuse, reaffirm the sector's economic contributions, and also its civic contributions. The hearing will be live streamed Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and you can find more on that at oversight.house.gov, and we will make sure to put a link to that in the chat during the program. Now, from the week's biggest headlines in the US, two forces shaping the philanthropy on a global scale, our next story takes us to the biggest, broadest, and most in-depth study yet of the environment for giving and receiving around the world. The 2025 Global Philanthropy Environment Index, released just days ago by the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, offers a sweeping look at how legal, political, and cultural conditions are influencing giving across more than 90 countries. To help us unpack the findings of this report and give us some additional details, I spoke earlier with Afshan Parlberg, Project Director of the Global Philanthropy Indices. Here is that conversation for you now. Thank you very much for being here today. It's really a pleasure to have you share information on the Global Philanthropy Environment Index. Maybe you can start by telling us what it is and why it was created.
Absolutely. Well, Jay, thanks first of all for having me as a guest on today's show. I was thrilled by the invitation, and I've had an opportunity to listen to some of your previous shows, and so this is a real treat for me. The Global Philanthropy Environment Index it's really a leading research tool for assessing the philanthropic environment, and it really helps to assess how philanthropic environments are both evolving, but also provides inspiration to think about how philanthropy can be reimagined to respond to different global and local challenges, as well as build vibrant communities. This 2025 Global Philanthropy Environment Index, and if it's okay, I'm going to use an acronym for today's purposes, the GPEI. This is the third edition that we've published, and so it builds upon two prior editions, which is the 2018 and the 2022 GPEIs. And so this is an opportunity to build on a baseline and understand how things are evolving across philanthropic environments.
Now, a lot has happened between those reports and today. How did world events between those eras, the 2018 report and the later report and today, COVID recovery, conflicts, AI, how did that shape some of the things you interrogated and then reported on?
Yeah, absolutely. So just briefly, the 2025 GPEI, it covers the periods of 2021 to 2023. And so during this time, it's helpful and important to contextualize what's going on in the world and what those global events are. So, for example, between this period of time, we saw major observations, such as you mentioned, the pandemic, as well as post pandemic recovery. We also saw cross border and domestic responses to address things like record breaking global temperatures, natural disasters, people experiencing war. So a lot has shaped what came across in the 2025 GPEI. We've also seen advancements in things like artificial intelligence, right? So collectively, these are important to keep into context. And this has shifted, right, between the prior reports. And so as we're observing what's happening, it's not a perfect comparison over time because the environment and technology and the way the world is evolving is shifting too. I will share the 2025 GPI is actually spread out across 111 different reports. And so it's got all of these very rich insights and observations. We'll probably keep it at a bit of a higher level and talk a little bit more on the global scheme of things, but we have 95 countries and economies represented, each of which is authored by an expert in that economy living or working there. We then have aggregated those economies into 15 regions. And so there's 15 regional reports. And then the school, the IU Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, has authored a global report that really aggregates all of these findings.
That's a lot, and it's a lot of people to report on something like that. So, in the end, how many scholars and how did you find them all to come to work together on this?
Yeah, it was such an amazing and incredible experience, and one that was enriching for me. We had nearly 200 people. We counted 173 people working in partnership to get this index across the finish line. And some have been prior partners with us. We use a bit of a rubric and a criteria to identify people that are other civil society leaders, academics who study or understand philanthropy and nonprofits, or legal experts who work in this space. And so those were sort of the three broad categories. And some are recurring experts. They've participated with us in prior years, and then others were found through collective networks. This collective action in the philanthropy world, helping us to recruit people that are wanting to be a part of this global movement to understand philanthropy.
Has that been easier to do these days than it was before, in a sense? Because I know there's been much discussion about kind of dislocation and conflict in all different sectors. But do you find that the people who are working on third sector issues are more inclined to work together on things like this?
My experience through leading the 2025 GPEI is experts that we recruited were very committed to not only doing this in their individual capacity, but also being part of a collective. This these series or this these aggregate of 111 reports were published on May 28th, and we had this special celebration across our experts. About a third of them joined, which was amazing and fantastic. And, one of our experts chimed in that, a lot of us have been communicating asynchronously, but what a treat and delight to be able to be on the same screen in the same time with people committed to this cause. So I would say it was a delightful experience of people, and quite fascinating to work with people who have the same level of commitment.
Now we should probably dive into the report for people who haven't read it yet, and we will make sure at the end to give a pointer to where people can read the full report. There's a lot of content there. There's also an executive summary, so we'll probably be talking at that level. But I think that you report out that the majority, or at least around 60% or so of economies, have a favorable environment for philanthropy. What does that mean, and what does it look like in practice?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let me just provide some context into what the GPEI is measuring. We've got 6 conditions or factors that we're looking at. We are looking at the ease of operating a nonprofit or philanthropic organization. What those organizations are, the types look different across the world. Some can have foundations, some can have non-governmental organizations, others consider endowments. So the type of organization looks different. We've also got economic incentives, the political environment, the social cultural environment, tax incentives, and cross-border giving. And so we look at these 6 factors in aggregate to try to measure and understand how things are changing, where are things improving within a country, within a region, and globally. And you'll have to bring me back to the beginning of the question. Sorry, Jay.
Well, I know that we're talking about a favorable environment. So it sounds like that's what you're finding, but is that true kind of across the globe, or are you seeing some major differences?
Yeah, so I think we can break that down in different ways, right? Overall, I think there's an important key finding in that more 3/5 of the economies that are represented do have a favorable environment. But when we break it down across regions, across factors, we can see some variations and differences in this way. What I think is really important before we move into the variations and differences is really just this very very important shared norm that we're seeing where generosity remains very favorable and a shared value. And I think that's important to highlight in a time when we're bombarded perhaps with negative news cycles. That's a very positive and consistent trend that we saw not only in the 2025 GPEI, but also across all 3 editions. The In the 2025 GPI, we saw that 14 out of 15 of the regions had a favorable sociocultural environment. And so that's one thing that I think has remained the same and is important to highlight. I think the other is that as we're looking at changes during the COVID era, we observe a persistence of collaboration between philanthropic organizations and governments. We see digital adaptations and local giving. And I think that's really important to remember because sometimes it's hard to tease that out when all these other pieces are happening. But if we do want to look at some of the variations across regions and factors, I think it's helpful to look at those 6 factors that we talked about. Let's start by just kind of looking at regional differences. I would say Western Europe was recorded as having the leading regional scores. And this is something we saw influenced by both economic growth, digital innovation, also the same theme of increased collaborations between philanthropic organizations and governments. And, we did some additional analysis. We saw that this also trended with economies demonstrating favorable environments had a higher per capita GDP. So we saw that association between the two. And I can share one example within our Western Europe region. We had the Principality of Liechtenstein, for example. They talked about having a strong infrastructure for philanthropy, as well as increased awareness of philanthropy, actually, as a result of the 2022 GPI report. So that was quite exciting for us. And I'll share maybe just a quote from them. According to the Liechtenstein, we had two report authors. They talk about the deep-rooted philanthropic commitment of the princely family serves as a role model for the people of Liechtenstein. So you kind of see this very um, supportive space for making it easier to engage in philanthropy. And so at regional levels, we see a lot of these variations. We also see variations in those 6 factors that I listed out, right? And so I'll highlight a couple that I think would be helpful. Our highest factor score was with the ease of operating a philanthropic organization. And so when we look at the ease of operating a philanthropic organization, this includes laws and regulations for forming, operating, or dissolving a philanthropic organization. And we saw our highest score here in Northern Europe, which had indications of a stable government and minimal government interference. And so those are some of the indications that we're kind of looking at. If we look at the most variance, so the highest discrepancy between the regions, we saw that registered actually on tax incentives. And we even see that within regions, right? So for example, we have the Baltics countries, which includes Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. And even within the region, we have differences on individual tax incentives, although they all do provide benefits for corporate donations. So there's an opportunity even within regions to go a little deeper to understand what's changing. And as I mentioned, we saw the least variance and really this uplifting idea of shared norms of generosity across sociocultural environments. We saw that to be favorable in 14 of the 15 environments. And we see in our region of US and Canada, for example, deep-rooted traditions of volunteering and giving. In the Caribbean, we have a strong informal helping culture, which is rooted in religion. Even in Venezuela, which had the lowest score on the index, we saw very high scores in the sociocultural factor, which had strong social, religious support. So those are just some kind of main ways that we've been able to assess how things are looking favorable or restrictive within the philanthropic environments across factors and regions. Happy to share more, but I'll pause there.
It's a lot already, and I think it's more than we've ever heard about Liechtenstein, at least here in this venue. So that was a lot of fun right there, and because it would be almost impossible to disentangle all the different factors in all those different countries and regions about what is making a more or less productive environment for philanthropy. Maybe one thing we can touch on that'll be very important and meaningful to people in the U.S., whether they look globally or they focus on domestic issues, is about how much change we're seeing in generosity, both in terms of giving that you've been talking about, and also volunteerism. Now, we've seen that trend line for decades now of declining giving and declining volunteerism. And I think we've seen some stats to support similar kinds of trends, although not in the same ways in the UK and in Canada. Are you seeing similar things here in this report, or are you seeing maybe something that we have been missing? Because I know that sometimes when people talk about this, they're missing maybe crowdfunding, or like you just said with some of these environments, they're missing some giving that's maybe unmarked or unrecorded because it's more familial in nature, like international transfers. So is giving really going down, or are you seeing markers of those things remaining fairly stable or even growing?
Yeah, this is a great question. So just want to back up a little bit in that the GPI really looks at the factors that are making it easier or harder to give. And so while each report tracks through the best available data how things are changing. We have other global reports, such as the Global Philanthropy Tracker, which really tracks those monetary values in dollars and cents in that more specific way. But what I think is helpful from this report is really the rich narrative of trying to understand perhaps what we're overlooking in our own locale or country environment, right? And so when we see something like, um, a barrier in cross-border giving because of increased costs. What are some examples that we can find from other countries or other regions where things are improving, and how can that inform our strategies and our thinking? So for example, we had about 7 economies that improved by more than that improved, let's just say, in this report without getting into the weeds of scoring. And we saw some of examples where Kenya had new tax incentives. And so being able to take a look and like, how were those tax incentives developed and built? And how can that inform what we might do if our score is low on tax incentives? For example, Colombia had new public policies that informed, the way that they were improving in their score. So I think it's more an opportunity to have this global platform and just stepping back and seeing the bigger picture of where and how things can be done differently, because sometimes we are so into the weeds of just that day to day. And for those that are frontline fundraisers or frontline leaders at NGOs, there's a myriad of things that happening in your day to day in your operations that make it difficult to kind of step back at the strategy and policy level. But this provides us that overview and speaks to people across borders where that can have some opportunities to influence the way we're doing things.
And before we step away from that entirely, I did want to ask you about the cross-border issue, because while, as you say, that this is not just looking at the dollars and cents per se, it's a lot more than that. What you're doing, there is, of course, the trend of many, not all, but many countries solidifying their borders, so to speak. And that's not just physical borders, but it might also be financial ones or regulatory borders. So are you seeing some barriers or maybe ways to address barriers that exist for cross-border giving? I know that's a concern, as here in the United States, we've received significant gifts from donors and philanthropies abroad, but there's some question about whether or not that will continue to be the case, or whether barriers might forestall some of that giving. Did you, through the course of this, learn much about cross-border giving and what trends you imagine might be emerging to either encourage it or again prohibit it?
Yeah, and just to echo what you're hearing from others, we did have experts, even though this covered the period of 2021 to 2023, they talk about how changes in political leadership can influence the philanthropic environment. And we're certainly seeing, reduced commitments for government funding, both in the United States as well as official development assistance reduced in other countries around the world. And so, I think that's a big question on people's mind. And I think there's this question about what role does philanthropy have to play in times where we're seeing some of these changes. In terms of cross-border giving, I think there's a couple of, emerging trends as well as post-COVID sorts of observations that are worth noting. One is that there during times like the COVID-19 pandemic, we did see enhanced collaborations between the government and philanthropy. I think Ireland is an example of that, where we saw this national policy on philanthropy, where you're seeing, this is not a trend across all economies. And so there are some that we can turn to look and see where there is collaboration initiatives happening, and how can we sort of learn and build on that momentum. And that's within country. We're also seeing cross-border giving regional efforts. I would highlight 2. One is in the European Union, where we're seeing it easier and reduced barriers to giving. We see that also in Singapore, where it's become a popular location for families across Asia to set up family offices. There's the favorable environment for cross-border philanthropic flows. So it's not even across the world, and I think there are still, pockets for us to look to and learn and observe where we can tap onto some of those spaces where cross-border giving is not only emerging but also thriving.
What has surprised you most about all this? You've been looking through a lot of data, but what really emerged for you personally?
For me, I'd really like to go back to the fact that there are so many people invested in trying to understand and uncover how philanthropy can play a role. And so just this global exchange of people willing to work together, which can be difficult at times to be able to produce this level of depth of research is something that perhaps, is not surprising, but it can be very warming to see that level of commitment and activity. And it gives me a lot of hope for what the future holds and the role that philanthropy can play when we have such a committed community of academics, practitioners, legal experts that are wanting to roll up their sleeves and work together to find ways to do this.
And where does the report go from here? You've assembled this big team of people. I know that you've done this before, but you've probably learned from this, not just the process, but all the body of data that you've gathered. So what do you imagine is the shape of the report as you go forward?
Yeah, well, we have so many people that collectively worked on this report. And I think, in the report, we share ways that we've had people use and share the GPI. I think we welcome ideas from those that are watching, but there's a few ways that we see this playing an important role going forward. One is just to increase awareness. I think knowledge can be empowering. And so how do we use this data to build and increase our knowledge and awareness of what these global trends are? So whether it's our partners or the Lilly School hosting and participating in convenings or in opportunities such as this to share the findings and build exposure, I think that's key. We also have incredible examples, probably too limited for today, but influencing policy that, there's opportunities to use this research to drive policy change, whether that be on cross-border giving. And we've had some partners that have engaged in those kinds of examples. We've also seen it inform strategy, and we hope we see more of that going forward. So is it that you're a fundraising consultant who advises international NGOs and you're able to see what trends are happening here to advise your clients on where and how to perhaps, establish or invest funds for NGO work and why? Are there things that you need to be aware of? So I think there's so much that can happen from this report, and we're excited to have it out in the world and ready to use.
And so for people who do want to get a copy and have not seen it yet, where's the best place to go?
Yes, I should drop the link here in the chat. It's Indianapolis. I should know this offhand. It's in global indices.indianapolis.iu.edu. Jay, I'm going to drop you the link so that there's no typos for people that are trying to look. But we have all the historical data there. We've got the current reports, all 111 with more information and details and maps and really much more detailed breakdowns. That's really exciting to dig into. So I hope all of you will check it out.
Thank you so much for all this. Really do appreciate it.
Thanks, Jay.
My thanks again to Afshan Parlberg for sharing those insights on this incredible, colossal report, major effort to bring together so many different viewpoints and so much data from around the world. And we'll again try to put that in the chat. We'll also make sure to include that in the show notes, but you can also just visit Afshan Parlberg's LinkedIn profile and that of the folks at the Lilly School, where they've been posting extensively on this. It is a report you do want to read. Now, back here at home, many nonprofits are focused on something I would argue is equally important to keeping the floodgates of generosity flowing, and that's how to communicate the impact of the gifts received once they are received. It's a challenge that goes far beyond spreadsheets and pie charts, and to explore what makes an impact report effective and how to tell a story that moves both hearts and funders, we turn to Jeff Rum, co-founder and CMO at StoryRaise and author of 6 Steps for Impact Report Success. Jeff, do come on camera if you would. It's really great to have you here today. And we'll see if he can come on to camera right now. And here he is. Hi there, Jeff.
You got it. Thanks, Jay. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to see you. And I know there's a lot to dig into in the report, but maybe I can just start with the easiest question, which is, what inspired you to write this thing?
Oh, wow. This is a framework, actually, that I've been working on for about 20 years. I use it. I used to run a creative agency. And when working with nonprofit clients, we always tried to think about how do we get to the heart of the story, right? Really try to create impact with the work that they're doing. So over time, we really were finding ourselves doing the same things, and I mentioned this in the ebook, which is starting with understanding the audience, really trying to dig into what the story is, and so on and so forth. So I wrote the book earlier this year because we at StoryRaise, we run a technology company, but we also do have a creative services division. So the two kind of really come together, where we're helping organizations think about how to show impact using technology, but also just how to tell really good stories so that it makes donors want to give.
And you probably have seen a lot before writing this book that led you into deciding that you needed to give people kind of a blueprint for approaching this. So was there a recurring challenge, a set of challenges that you kept seeing in nonprofit communications that you decided you just needed to lay this out for folks?
Yes, I'd say the biggest challenge that I've seen is fundraising and marketing really has been siloed for a long time. Right. And one of the reasons why I wanted to create this ebook is because I want to figure out ways to get fundraising teams and marketing teams to work more collaboratively. And this framework, the 6 steps, really allows teams to do that because it integrates both understanding the donor audience, but also understanding what communications is about and how to amplify really good storytelling. So that was really the premise. And that's been the biggest challenge that I've seen in the last couple of decades, which is how do we get these silos to be broken down so that organizations can work more collaboratively, ultimately to get donors to move.
I do want to ask you later about that, how some things just are so difficult to change, even when we recognize them, and silos are one. But before we get to that, I'd love to get a quick tour of what you cover in the book, because there are 6 big steps. And for those who haven't read it yet, can you outline what those are?
Yeah, so we call it the impact framework. And it uses it's an acronym, of course, because nonprofits love acronyms. And so the first step is to identify the audience, really understanding who the supporters are on a deeper level. The second step is to measure the outcome of the work. And the reason we say it as the second step, because normally people would think that's the last thing you would do. But to understand what the outcomes are, you first have to think about what story you want to tell. So that becomes the second piece. Thirdly, it's important to personalize for donors as much as possible. So that involves crafting personalized messages and stories so that you can connect with donors on a much deeper level. Fourth, we have amplify the mission, which is really understanding how to use different channels to broadcast successes in order to reach a wider audience. Fifth is to communicate with transparency and emotion. And those two things oftentimes conflict with each other, but I think there's a way to do it. And I talk about it more in this ebook. And then finally, the last piece, but most important, is how to thank and recognize donors in many different ways.
Another thing where we keep talking about it, but it seems like it's so hard to change. So let's save that too, because that piece is so important to dive into in depth. But you started with identifying, and that's a big thing for many of the people in our audience, not just because of the nature of our sponsor, DonorSearch, but also because I think we recognize that we need to find people who have a heart for the work that we do. But maybe that's too, reductive. When you're thinking about identifying, who are you advising people to identify, and what are some of the ways that you encourage them to do it?
Yeah, so I'll share a story. I was working with a nonprofit based in the Los Angeles area during COVID, and they were losing a lot of donors. They had lost about, I don't know, 1,500 donors in the previous year, and they were figuring out, why is this happening? What can we do to change this pattern? And so we started asking them questions about their donors, and they were like, "Oh, no, no, we know who the donors are. We really know them well. We understand them. We don't need to really identify who they are." So we encouraged them, though, to send out a questionnaire or survey to the donors to directly ask them about their preferences, their interests, what motivates them, why they give, what issues they care about. And as soon as we got the results back, it was eye-opening. Let's just say they really did not believe what they were reading, because they thought they knew their donors, but they actually didn't really know their donors well, and why they were not giving anymore, and what were some of the motivations and behaviors around the donor audience, that these were only donors that had fallen off. So those are the people that we surveyed. And so I always say, like, even if you think you know who your audience is, it's great to ask questions, right? So 80% of I believe of fundraising is listening. So if we listen really well to the donors, we'll understand how to motivate them and how to create content and communications that resonates with them. So that's why I think identifying the audience is so important. It's the first step in the framework, because if you don't know the audience, it's very hard to do anything else. So that's why it's, to me, it's the number one thing, to just figure it out. And there's lots of ways to really understand the audience. A survey is one way. Having just direct calls with donors, just picking up the phone and saying, "Hey, can you talk to me for 15 or 20 minutes? I have some questions. I'd love to learn a little bit more about you." And this is not a solicitation. I'm really just curious. I want your input or your insights in our work. And you can learn so much just by listening and speaking to folks. So then there's analytics and other, like, social media insights and things you can do to really learn about the audience. But it doesn't have to be complicated. It could just be about sending out a survey, talking to people, looking at some data, and then you can move on to the next steps.
I have to ask you about that. And again, you don't have to reveal the organization.
Yeah.
You shouldn't. But I imagine that what you experienced there, you've seen in other settings too, where there's initial resistance. Like, we already know this, whether or not they do. And then you give them a kind of a safe passage to discovery.
Yeah.
And in this case, it sounds like it was a group of people that they had already lost. They'd fallen off the file. Is that how you made it palatable for them to ask questions? I guess this is a broader way of asking, what is it that makes us so resistant to asking questions of people who probably care and would be happy to talk with us?
Yes, I think from this organization standpoint, they didn't want to take the time. They thought it would be too time consuming. And I explained to them, this does not need to take a long time. You send a survey out, you could keep it open for a week and then close the survey, and tell people, also incentivize them. So there could be some kind of giveaway or some incentive to get people to take a survey. That was also something we had to sell them on, but that's a typical research driven approach, right? So there's to get people to complete a survey or to do some kind of audience research, you can offer them something. But once we were able to convince them, we said, okay, if you think you know your audience really well, then at least this will just make you feel that way, right? So it's just confirming what you think you know. So that was the way we got them to agree to it. Then once the data came back and they were like, whoa, we didn't realize people care about these issues. We thought they cared about those issues. Or we didn't realize this is why they fell off. We thought it was because of COVID. But no, COVID was just the excuse, because they weren't happy with the communications or the transparency. So we learned a lot just from the experience. But yeah, I mean, it is a challenge, and it's not unique to this organization. I've seen it over and over again.
What are some of the things that people discover, whether they're doing this through a survey process or, like you said, they're using analytics? There are lots of ways to do it. One-on-one discovery calls. What are some of the biggest surprises for the organizations that you've advised to just go through some kind of, a process of just interrogating the people who care?
So there are three things that I would say are critical. One is communications. Folks think that many organizations believe that they're communicating with their donors in a timely way, in a way that makes the donor feel like they're getting the information they need. And oftentimes it's organizations get stuck in the way they've done things for so long. Oh, but we send a newsletter out every month, so they should know what we're doing. Well, there are other ways to communicate. You can send a text message. You can make sure that you have different groups on social media so you're segmenting audiences effectively. So it's communication is the first thing. The second piece is transparency. I remember a Nielsen Norman survey that I read many, many years ago. This is probably 15 years old now, but it still like sticks in the front of my mind. It said that most donors go to an organization's website and they want to know two things. They want to know what they do and where the money's going, right? And they did this big research project where they've realized that most nonprofits on their homepage do not tell people what they do, and they don't tell people where the money goes. So when we did this, when we do a lot of these surveys, I always want to ask those questions. Do the donors know what the organization actually does? Sounds kind of silly, right? Because they've given to this organization, so they should know what the organization does. But oftentimes they don't. It could have been that a friend asked them to donate, or they went to a gala, or they, maybe participated a while ago, but they don't remember why they gave or what it was for. So if the organization's not consistently telling people what they do and why they do it, that's, I think, like a real miss. And the second piece is, where does my money go? Like, I'm going to give you a donation. People want to know. Transparency is so important right now. And so that's the second piece. And then finally, people are just, and I mentioned this at the front of the answer, but people just want to do things the way they've been doing them for so long within the nonprofit sector, I find, and they're afraid of change. So I think the biggest thing that we learned from talking to stakeholders or donors is that the donor base is changing, right? The way they give is changing. What motivates them is changing. Generations of giving are changing. Why people are giving and what they want to see and what they want to get for their gift. So I think those are the three things that I see most come up when we actually research with donors. And yet organizations are always surprised. But yeah.
As you talk about this, it occurs to me that, and there's a lot to unpack in the book as well, even though it's not a really long book. But
No.
what's great about it is it's also, it gets to the heart of the matter, but it's also very practical. I mean, you have a whole section that kind of takes people through what an impact report can include. But I want to touch on something that you said a second ago, which is that the audience is changing. And the audience is always changing, right? We never step in the same river twice, is the old philosophical notion. But at the same time, a lot of our actions don't change at all. That includes whatever reporting we do. So how has reporting changed with time? Like, what you've written this book this now in the last little bit. But if you'd written this around the time that Nielsen report 15 years ago, what would an impact report have looked like then? What does it look like now? And the reason I'm asking that is because maybe that will help people to see that, we really need to tune this up.
So in many ways, I think the fundamentals have not really changed, at least in the last couple of decades. I think organizations that report on the work they do, why they do it, and the impact of the donations that they receive, and it's clear, consistent, and leads the donor to understand what is the arc of the story that's being told here. That is, I think, the fundamentals really have not shifted. What's shifted is the way people consume information, right? So when we started with building our platform years ago, it was a way to move people from the print mode of getting an annual report to a digital annual report. In fact, our company name was called Yearly when we started, because the idea was to move the yearly report from a print piece to a digital piece. That was the problem that we were trying to solve. I think what we've learned in the last few years, it's not just having a digital piece so that maybe organizations can save printing costs or it's easier for them to send out, but how do you engage donors in an experience when you're sending out your report. So for example, what we've done now with building out our technology is that, and there's other technology too that does this in other spaces, but it allows people. So Jay, you would get a report to your email, you would open it up, and the report content would be suited for you. It will tell you about the things you care about the impact of your gift. And technology now allows organizations to do this without having to, one by one do this individually. It's just taking data. You have to have good data, but it's taking some kind of data and making sure that your donors understand the impact of their gift. And the more you can personalize and customize, then the donors will feel like it's specifically, the report is specifically for them. And I think that's where we see the direction going. And that's what's different today. But the fundamental piece of like telling the folks what you do, how you do it, why you do it, and the impact of their work, that to me is the most critical piece.
And that isn't that kind of blueprint, I guess, that you have.
Yes.
That goes through the pieces. So whether it's short or long format, whether it's video or text.
Exactly.
Okay. But I do want to ask you about that change, because we've all seen, well, because I've been doing this a while, I hear from the pre-internet through to, 6-second attention span, I think is what people are.
Yeah.
So how are we thinking about impact reporting, even through a personalized lens that lends itself to these attention spans, which have varied? And in fact, right now, as we're speaking, this program is an hour, but we chop it into bits. If this were Joe Rogan, it could be 3 hours long. But if this were on TikTok, it wouldn't be any more than, what? I mean, I don't even know what the average is right now, but it's under 30 seconds. So
absolutely.
How does that impact then when you're talking with people, not just in this book, but generally as a consultant and just as a thinker, on things like format length, and whether or not we need to be it's so precise, albeit with personalization, that people can get that bite-sized chunk and just swallow the thing without chewing much on it?
Yeah, first of all, it's a great question. So I appreciate your asking. And the answer is not so straightforward, and I'll explain why. So what I would recommend, and we do this with many of the organizations that work with us, is let's start with the long form content, right? So because that's where you can go deep, right, and go into depth about the work that you do. So start with that as your foundation. But the beauty of that is now you have this long piece of content that you can break up and have 30 different social media posts going across a month, right? Where each day you're taking one idea out of that and sharing it with your audience. And what it also allows you to do is to speak to different audiences on different channels. And that's why I always emphasize the audience understanding or identifying your audience, because if you know that your Facebook audience is different than your TikTok audience, which is different than your email list and different than the public that you're going to reach with like PR or general press outreach or more traditional, then you could say, okay, we have all this content. Now, how do we break it up? So we're speaking to people not only where they are, but who they are, right? So you're speaking to the right people in the right ways at the right time. And that has to do with just breaking up the content and making sure that it's the right length for the right channel. With our impact reports, the way that, at least on the StoryRaise platform, we encourage organizations to what we call chunk content, which is basically taking stories and chunking them. So you might have a very long story, but if you're going to share it on one screen, chunk it into like different categories. So maybe this story has 3 different parts to it. So make sure that people can see that there are 3 parts. And then also use different mediums, right? So you could use video. You can even use audio if you want people to just listen to something. So I think those are the different ways that I would suggest thinking about content. Again, it goes back to knowing who you're speaking to and where they are.
Right. This is such a great discussion, because there's a tendency not only for people not to want to change, the difficulty people have with change, but also to assume that everybody is just like them. And in terms of the way they consume media, right? And I'm not just talking about generationally, I'm talking about personally. So some people like
Absolutely.
Proust, some people like Hemingway, some people like Basho. And even if we're talking about stuff that existed before the internet, you're talking about long format, kind of medium length format, and tiny. And
Yeah.
that's true today. So does this go back to some of what you're saying about identifying an audience before you even go to then writing this report in the end? Because I don't know how you would know even what chunks to create if you didn't know your audience in the first place.
You're exactly right. I have 3 young children between the ages of 7 and 15. They each learn differently, right? They might have gone through the same subjects in school and they're consuming the same information. They have to read the same books in 5th grade as each other. But one of them loves to read, sit down with a book, a physical book. The other one loves to use like a tablet because just the way that the screen reader works best. And the other one has some learning issues. So he likes to listen to the book. So you have 3 people very relatively close in age, but they just learn differently. Adults are the same way. We all learn differently. We all consume information differently. So I think that's why technology becomes a really important factor in this, because you can use technology to reach learners in different ways and people who consume information in different ways. So that's why I always say, think about your audience, because if you know who they are and where they are, then you can create the content that's specifically for them.
So I'll ask you the impossible question I always like to ask. If you were to give people one thing to take away from this conversation, the one thing they should do right now, just to get started on creating impact reports that are truly impactful at this personal level, what's the one thing they could do to get started?
So I don't want to sound like I'm repeating myself, so I apologize. However, I do think this is the one thing, but it's talk to your donors and ask them. And I don't mean talk to them from a solicitation standpoint, because they're used to that, but talk to them from listen to their needs from a communication standpoint. How many times do donors get a call from an organization where they say, we don't want to ask you for a gift right now. We actually want to learn how we can better communicate with you. What would resonate with you? How do we share information that you feel the impact of your gift is inspiring you, and inspiring you not to just give, but to get more involved in the organization. So I think if people could take one thing away, yes, I know a lot about creative and about technology, and we've been working in this business for a long time. But at the core of it, it's just knowing who your audience is and what's going to make them get inspired and want to get more engaged with your organization and the cause that they believe in. And people give to organizations that believe what they believe. So I think learning values, interests, lifestyle, motivation, those are the things that to me are going to make the impact report or whatever content you're creating that much more effective.
Jeff, for people who want to get a copy of this book and learn more about your work, where can they turn?
Yeah, so just go to storyraise.com and you'll see a link on the top. You can go to blog and you'll find the 6 steps report. Also, you can reach out to us. There's a big contact us form on the website. If anyone has any questions, if they even just want to meet with us and talk about ways that we can help support them, we're happy to. So yeah, storyraise.com is the best way to reach us.
Thanks very much. We've just put a link in the chat as well, so do take a look for the book. It's easy and easy to get a copy of, and I do encourage you to take a look at it. Thank you so much, Jeff. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Appreciate your time, Jay.
Well, folks, coming up this Thursday in the Philanthropy Mastermind series, we're going to be taking a fresh look at how your personality can shape your fundraising success. On how to raise, again on Thursday, Brian Saber, president of Asking Matters, leads a discussion on Asking Styles 101, building donor relationships through your key strengths. It's one of our CFRE accredited programs, so if you're collecting those credits for your certification, you'll be happy to know you can get them here. It's free, as always, courtesy of our sponsor, DonorSearch. Our thanks to them. This session will be a practical introduction to the Asking Styles framework, a tool that was designed to help fundraisers understand their natural approach to one-on-one solicitation So you'll learn how to tailor your pitch, run effective meetings, and collaborate by leaning into your strengths, whether you're an introvert, extrovert, planner, improviser, whatever that is. That's again this Thursday on June 5th. And don't forget to check out our podcast, the PM Podcast, which currently features a conversation with a great friend to the sector, Martha Schumacher, past chair of AFP Global, head of Hazen, and a leader in the fundraising world. It's all about spilling the tea. I'm sure you'll find that as much fun as I did. That's available for you wherever you like to listen. And of course, on the website of our sponsor, DonorSearch, the leader in the world of responsible AI and donor research solutions for nonprofits everywhere, which is available at DonorSearch.net, a place where you can get a lot of the content from this series, our 3 shows on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and then the drops on the podcast on Friday nights, as well, of course, as learning about your donors. You can do all that once again at DonorSearch.net. Thanks for spending time with us today. We'll look forward to seeing you next time on Frontlines of Social Good. Until then, take care.